Today we are launching our Work Zone Awareness Week. It's a campaign that's nationally done every April where state DOTs and the federal government all acknowledge the safety conditions in work zones. Unfortunately, here in Louisiana, we've had 14 deaths in work zones in 2019. 12 of them were collisions. Around the country, we've had 857 deaths in construction zones. And that's what each one of these cones here represent. One life lost in 2019. And because these employees are out there building our roads, building our infrastructure, doing law enforcement, state troopers, motor assist patrol. We've actually had situations where police cars and motor assist patrols are actually crashed into in the rear end. And so we're protecting them, trying to advocate and promote responsible driver behavior, awareness in work zones, reduce your speed, because those individuals don't have bumpers, they don't have seatbelts on, they don't have helmets. All they have on is a jersey and a steel toe boot and a hard hat. That's what's got to save them and protect them, and we want them to get home safely. So this is about awareness. We can do better. Our numbers are unacceptable. Those 14 lives that were lost in 2019 were people who were coming to do public work, and their families are no longer the same. They're kids without a mother or a father, or children of parents who are no longer here. And so we've affected those families, and we've affected lifestyles in Louisiana as a result of it. And not to mention, our statistics are unacceptable across the board, and so we need to do everything we can to reduce those type of crashes everywhere, but more specifically in a work zone, because they don't deserve it. Because people tend to take these for granted, that if they drive home safely today and aren't in an accident, they don't assume that there have been crashes or collisions. Last year alone, we killed almost 3 people a day on the highways of Louisiana. That's 3 people per day. There's only 365 days in a year. Think about those numbers. You could have been one of those 3. I could have been one of those 3. So for every driver that makes it home, there's a couple of drivers who won't. And so this is about awareness. It's about saying, I'm going to rush to work and rush through this zone. That's unacceptable. We've seen more people dying in these crashes as a result of distracted driving, drowsy driving, or speeding. Unrestrained drivers actually is another issue, because one of these cones could represent someone who was driving and not necessarily an employee. So it's about awareness, it's about driver responsibility, and we want people to all do their part, because this is Louisiana. This is a state that we care about, and we care about our sisters and brothers here in Louisiana, and we care about those especially in uniform. Policemen, firemen, highway workers, they're essential.
Anything else you'd like to add?
Well, look, at the end of the day, we can do better. This is not where we want to be. When I became secretary, we had fewer deaths in work zones. We had fewer deaths on highways. While we're making tremendous progress, Governor Edwards and the legislature has made unprecedented investments in infrastructure. And this department has done an exceptional job creating construction zones in every corner of the state. Highways, interstates, bridges, rural and urban, all kinds of projects. Be aware, recognize that this is progress. But these cones, they don't represent progress in many respects, and we want to minimize them. The hardest thing I have to do as secretary is call an employee's family and say, your loved one was killed while at work, knowing that we don't pay anyone enough to make that kind of sacrifice. I'm excited about the opportunity to do better for Louisiana. I'm excited about the opportunity to make the public aware of the 14 deaths that occurred in just 12 crashes here in Louisiana in a construction zone. If we could reduce that, our numbers would be much better than they were last year and the year before. So I'm encouraged by this, but I'm also saddened by this as well.
We are getting a message out today. Unfortunately, these are days where we have to get messages out because, the people in the motoring public are not doing everything they possibly can that would avoid these kinds of necessary campaigns to save lives of those people in our work zones, people who are doing every day the work that benefits us as we travel throughout Louisiana. They're building, they're repairing, they're improving our roadways for our benefit. Drive through work zones as if you worked there, as if someone in your family worked there, because someone from someone's family does. They want to go home to that family. They want to live to see another day, to plan another year, to watch generations grow up. That doesn't happen when motorists are distracted or impaired or speeding. Work zone awareness events, they change behavior. You know, human behavior is something that it doesn't change overnight. It takes, you know, time for people to absorb whatever the right mechanics are of a situation. Even though it's pretty elementary to drive with full attention on the task, you know, we have to continue to educate people, to tell them not to be distracted, to be mindful and totally focused on what is a very highly concentrated task, driving a multi-ton machine. We talk about a quartet of deadly choices, that quartet being, you know, failure to buckle up. That is so necessary. That is just, you know, primary point one, to make sure that you're safe and the passengers in your vehicle are safe as you get into that vehicle. You know, not to speed. Speeding makes any crash all the more likely to be fatal and to cause, you know, serious, horrific, and permanent injury. You know, we want people to not be distracted, and we want people, you know, not to be impaired. And impairment can come in all sorts of ways. You know, alcohol is an impairing substance, but so are over-the-counter drugs, prescription drugs, not to mention illicit drugs. So, you know, make sure that you are ready for what is a significant task, driving this you know, machine that can do incredible damage, and to be the responsible operator of that machine. With impaired driving, we have work to do. We have work to do. And for anybody who would consider, you know, operating a vehicle while impaired, there is absolutely no excuse. Not that there ever was, but in this day and age, with technology, with rideshare, with public transit, taxis, designated drivers, you know, there are so many options that do not put you as an impaired person in that driver's seat.
Thank you all for joining us. We're excited to be here, and we're excited to wait a few minutes for the rain to blow somewhere else and not here. I'm Sean Wilson, Secretary for the Department of Transportation and Development, and we are excited that you are here with us to celebrate something that we don't relish celebrating, and that is beginning our annual Work Zone Awareness Week efforts. Every April around this entire country, DOTD joins an effort with other transportation agencies as well as our federal partners to join together to highlight the importance of safety in work zones. You know, it goes without saying that motorists should always use caution when driving, but it is critical that motorists use safety precautions while traveling through work zones, as men and women are present performing their duties to make our transportation system a lot more effective. It is effectively their offices. While I am in the comfort of four walls on the third floor of this building, we have hundreds and hundreds of employees, thousands of employees that are actually on the streets every day without bumpers, without helmets, nothing but a bright uniform like you see standing behind us. Behind me and on the front lawn of this property is the memorial that we erect every year. Each orange cone you see represents the life of a construction worker, a motorist, or a pedestrian killed in a work zone. Our numbers from a safety perspective, Director Freeman would agree, are not acceptable. Not for me and not for the employees, and certainly it should not be for our citizens. In 2020, there were 12 collisions in a work zone, resulting in 14 fatalities. And in 2020, there were over 547 injuries in Louisiana work zones. Putting that in perspective, that's again far too many. You see 14 cones in front of the DOTD sign with a Louisiana emblem in black, and that represents those Louisiana lives that are lost. And the 547 cones you see here represent some of Louisiana, and then the balance of them represent folks across the country. A majority of these fatalities were preventable, meaning they could have been avoided. They are attributed to motorists being distracted, impaired, or speeding. 3 of these wrecks involved actually hitting construction vehicles and equipment, and in some cases, motor assist patrols and law enforcement vehicles. People who are taking their lives in their own hands to keep us all safe. Nationwide, there were 857 deaths in work zones. These statistics are shocking, unfortunately, and they seem to continue to increase year after year, where in 2019 there were only 11 fatalities in Louisiana work zones and 842 fatalities nationwide. Those numbers have increased. Last year alone, we lost nearly 1,000 people on our roads. Every time we get on the road, we should use caution and drive as if our own families are out there working on that roadway. So there's some tips that we like to share and promote. First is staying alert and giving your full attention to the roadway. Pay very close attention to signs and work zone flaggers. They're there to protect you and their coworkers. Obey the posted speed limits. That's important because we know crashes can kill people, but speed makes them much more dangerous and almost a certainty to have a death. Avoid tailgating. Needless to say, do not drink and drive. And this is something that we take for granted. Wear your seatbelts. There's a shocking number of unrestrained victims that we're seeing across the country. Last but not least, put down your cell phones while you're driving. Drive hands-free if you have to talk. But remember, any distraction is a distraction, whether it's a cell phone, a radio, children, or loved ones in the car with you. It's my hope that one day we can deliver the news that there were no fatalities on our roadways. And that may sound kind of cornish, but believe it or not, there are places in this country, in this world, where we're seeing those low numbers exist with very similar VMTs that we might see on the roads here in Louisiana, and that's vehicle miles traveled. Standing with me today are individuals that we will recognize. They're in the DOTD uniforms because I think it's important to put a face with these casualties that could happen to make sure that you have a personal connection to do your best. So we have behind me Michelle Williams, Edward Collins, Mike Howers Jr., Daniela Bess, and Elena DeVitrio, all of DOTD workforce that will be in a work zone. It can be litter, it can be overlay, it can just be a traffic management issue. All of them are work zones. Also standing with me are our federal partners and our state-specific partners that work with us from an education standpoint, from an enforcement standpoint, and of course at the federal level, as I said, a regulatory standpoint. So I'm going to introduce our partners to come up. Following all of their presentations, we're happy to take any questions from the press that may be here. Our first speaker will be Wes Bollinger, who is our Federal Highway Administrator for the state of Louisiana. And then we have from State Police, LSP Dustin Dwight, and then the Executive Director of the Highway Safety Commission, Lisa Freeman, who's been a tireless advocate to help educate folks regionally around our state.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson, for inviting me to speak today and for your continued commitment to safety in Louisiana. National Work Zone Awareness Week is traditionally observed in the spring of each year to begin the nation's construction season. Around the country, people aren't as fortunate as we are here in Louisiana, where we can do construction typically almost year-round. So in other parts of the country, they have very limited construction during the winter. So that's why it's held in the spring, at least from a national perspective. This year's theme is work zones are a sign to slow down. So if you think about it, anytime you see a work zone, you should be slowing down. The recently enacted Infrastructure and Investment and Jobs Act invests $350 billion in highways over the next 5 years. So there will be an increase in work zones in the coming years. So even more attention is going to be needed to pay to work zones. Reducing crashes and congestion in work zones is a priority for Federal Highway Administration. And as Secretary Wilson mentioned, on the national level, the data shows that in 2020, the data was not good. There were 850 work zone fatalities. There were 774 crashes that had fatalities, and there were 117 worker fatalities that happened in those accidents or those crashes. And speed was a contributing factor in 37% of work zone crashes. So as a driver, you must use extra caution in work zones and keep yourself and others safe. And as a reminder, in the national theme, work zones are a sign to slow down. So thank you.
Good morning. My name is Sergeant Dustin Dwight. I'm here on behalf of Colonel Lamar Davis of Louisiana State Police. It's an honor to be here with Dr. Wilson and the rest of your DOTD team. I've seen your executive leadership from Shreveport all the way down to Covington, whether it's a natural disaster, hurricane, significant crash on the interstate. It's always a pleasure to stand next to you, especially during this week as we raise awareness to work zone safety. The Louisiana State Police will continue to work hand in hand with DOTD on construction sites around the state, and we will do so with safety in mind. We will remain proactive in those zones, enforce the laws, and work closely with the construction crews to provide early warning and direction as motorists approach our work zones. Sir, when you put these people behind you, and it really, we heard a lot about statistics, but when we see the families, the people, our neighbors, our brothers, our sisters behind us, it really helps raise that awareness. And I think that's something that Louisiana is an extremely compassionate state, and when we see the people that are the most vulnerable in these work zones, we tend to do our best. I was at Louisiana State Troop B in Kenner last week, and we have mailboxes in the troops, and each trooper has his name on it, and they were getting subpoenas or letters or whatever it is for interdepartmental mail. One of the names up there that brought my attention was Trooper Hung Lee. His mailbox is still up at the troop, and you can see it to this day. And so work zone safety has a personal significance to Louisiana State Police. Trooper Lee was killed. He's one of our own troopers that was killed in a construction zone. Trooper Lee was seriously injured while working a construction zone on Interstate 55 between Ponchatoula and Manchac. He was assigned to a road crew, and it was diverting traffic when his patrol car was struck from behind. His vehicle burst into flames, and it caused burns on 70% of his body. On June 3rd, 1998, Trooper Lee died from the injuries he sustained in that crash. So there's a personal significance to this safety in this week. The commitment of the Louisiana State Police to the citizens and motorists of Louisiana will not change. We will remain devoted to highway safety and educating the public on the safety of our roads. We will continue to work alongside our partners at Highway Safety, DOTD, and our other federal agencies. We ask that the motorists do their part to ensure a safe work zone environment as we move forward in continuing to improve our community and transportation infrastructure. Please drive safely.
We've all heard the phrase, what's in it for me? That phrase is at the core of most marketing tactics. The theory is that when consumers are in the position to make certain choices, they do so based on how some product or how some service will meet their needs or benefit them in some way. So the question today is, what's in it for you? With the you being all the people who drive on the roadways of our state. What's in it for people to drive responsibly, to drive mindfully, with all of their attention focused on this one task, which is likely the highest concentration activity that they will do all day. It's certainly the highest consequential thing that many people will do in a day, since driving behavior decides the permanent course of other people's lives. We've heard a lot about mindfulness and intentionality in the past few years. In fact, throughout this pandemic that we've all been living through, many experts have identified mindfulness as a way of coping with and offsetting some of the stresses that the pandemic has produced. Although there's an entire pile of articles about mindfulness, there's nothing new or extraordinary about it. Mindfulness is really a simple thing. It's just being fully aware of where you are and what you're doing. It's really the primary prereq for anyone who sits in a driver's seat, whether that person is a teenager looking to get their first-time driver's license, or that person is a mature driver who's been traveling on Louisiana roadways for decades. That prerequisite of good driving behavior is a fixed thing. It doesn't change. It doesn't depend on the circumstances of your day. Having a bad day doesn't exempt us from the need to be fully aware and fully engaged in such a consequential activity. Even living in these challenging and uncertain times doesn't give us a pass from responsible behavior when we're in the driver's seat. Maybe even because of the stressful times that we're living in, we should be all the more focused, especially in light of the ever-increasing fatality statistics that we continue to see. where there are, for instance, as Secretary Wilson was pointing out, more fatalities than is acceptable. More fatalities just in this year alone, in 2022, than there are days in 2022 so far. So let's consider who's on the receiving end of our driving choices. Who are those folks that are incredibly exposed to our driving choices? Meaning our brothers and sisters, these people behind us who show up on the front lines to do the work, to build, to repair, to improve our roadways. People whose jobs place them in work zones are doing important and critical things for our benefit. They do their jobs, and they do them without airbags. They do them without bumpers, as Secretary Wilson noted. They do them in the gear that you see them in, possibly with hard hats and steel-toed shoes. And so we also should do our job on the roadway and in those work zones. Our job is to drive, just drive. Drive without distraction, drive without impairment, drive without aggressiveness, drive with total engagement, since we're the operators of multi-ton machines along some very challenging traffic areas, especially those traffics within work zones. Drive as though people's lives depend on it, because they do. That's what's in it for you. Doing the right thing is the end game. It is the reward. People going home to their families and to their friends is the benefit of doing the right thing. Not just today, not just during the week of work zone awareness, every day and every trip.
So I think the most important thing that we can summarize today's press conference with is the faces of the people that you see up here in uniform, because they're the ones who are getting paid what they're getting paid to do work for citizens, and they come to work every day expecting to go home every day. And whether it's distraction, whether it's drowsiness, whatever the cause of that accident is, 98% of them, I would anecdotally say, are preventable, because we take tremendous caution in where we put equipment, when we put equipment out there, and where we place our people. And so we would ask the public to do your part to make sure that these people in uniform are appreciated, respected, and made to be brought home safely every day of the year, as Lisa said. So with that, we're happy to entertain any questions that we might have from the media, for our speakers, or the individuals up here in uniform, and that includes our officers, to talk or share with you any feedback about their experiences. Some of us have done this very recently outside of this building, just in the background here, where we cleaned up about 1,000 feet in an hour, picked up about 4 truckloads of litter, but countless people were speeding 10, 20 feet away from us. It's a scary situation to do. All of our partners, our safety staff, the educational staff, the enforcement staff, and the engineering expertise that goes to keep our roads safe. Remember, every piece of safety is important. Work zones are exceptionally important. I made an announcement this morning as we held a moment of silence for those that we've lost. In the 100-year history of DOTD, we've accounted for 47 of our employees whose names are listed on a monument inside this building. No different than the mailbox of Trooper Lee. These aren't names or people that are forgotten by their co-workers. So we appreciate all that you will do to ensure that safety is priority, job number one when you get behind the wheel or a passenger seat in the vehicle. So thank you all for participating today.
We're very excited at the Highway Safety Commission to be part of, anything that DOTD does, because they crunch the numbers. They know what the statistics are. They know where the educational focus needs to be. And so to be part of their outreach is a tremendous opportunity. And we're just grateful to be a part of the messaging.